welcome to Young Adult Adventist, also known as YAA. I'm John Ubongan.
And I'm Chandler Coleman, and we're grateful whether you're watching from YouTube, whether you're listening from Spotify or any other podcast platform, and if for this specific one, if you're here live with us. Pretty cool that first time we've had a live audience, so it's amazing to have you guys sitting here in the audience with us today.
And along with the live audience, we have here two special guests, one reoccurring, Thomas Turk. If you want to introduce yourself.
Nate Perry, it's my first time here. Thanks for having me.
He's from our church at McDonald Road, and we're lucky to have him here and blessed to have him here.
Yeah, so first, the whole plan was to go through the questions that were asked off the QR code. But since we do have a few people here, I want to open it up first if, by any chance, you guys have any questions you would just like to ask. If not, I didn't plan on it. But if you guys in the audience right now, does anyone have a question you would like a specific question, either about our podcast or about just, Christian life in general, about a young adult that you guys would like to talk about? Yes. Okay. So the question was, for those listening, what is the best outlet to make our podcast known? And just to clarify, by outlet, do you mean like specifically advertising or like where we post the actual podcasts? Okay. Yeah. So again, the question, like advertising, social media, what is the best for that for our podcast? So John, would you?
I would say, like I mentioned up there on the stage during the Sabbath school service, right now a lot of people are on social media. I think the best way to advertise starting up a podcast would be on social media or via word of mouth, honestly. Just by word of mouth, it gets around fast, pretty quick.
Yeah. And also, but the thing is with social media that I heard is like when you advertise on your specific social media platforms, the only audience you're mainly getting is the audience you already know. And so that can be great. That can be great for people, for them, like he said, word of mouth, to tell other people. But like especially Instagram, it's like if you advertise on Instagram, that's mainly just the people that you already know that are getting it. Yes, it can get out. We're also on TikTok, and TikTok does a lot better job about just advertising to everybody and not just the people that you're following or with. Instagram is more of the people you're with, but it's still such a big community of the people that you know that can help. And also just getting views on the YouTube too, because the whole episode is posted on the YouTube, and you can actually see us talking. It's like the live thing. And so that's pretty good advertisement too. So Instagram is a lot for the people that you already know to kind of get it out to them, but they can also be really good about advertising it too if they repost it and things like that. So Instagram, a big one, but I've discovered TikTok, you get so many views from people that you aren't following or you aren't friends with. And so social media and really just being consistent with it. That's the thing, because you can start posting and it can be great, it can get traction, but if you let it go, it's kind of like you're losing that traction that you've gained. So, all right. And does anyone else have any questions? And we can start with these questions that were scanned by the QR code. Yes.
How do you balance?
So her question was how do you balance your spending time with God and prioritizing your life in college, and also here, and we have high schoolers too. So how do you, and I would just pose this to you guys, and we also have Nate, in adult life here, so he could even shed some light. But how do you guys balance spending time with God, your relationship with God, but also the stresses of work, of school, and things like that?
For me, when I was doing college in Chat State, I'm currently not doing college, but in my first couple of semesters, I would say balancing school, work life, and God in general is very hard. So for me, I would make it a point to not try to balance it, but try to involve Him in your daily life and pray and seek that He is there with you, walking by you each and every step of the way. So that way you have Him by your side and it's not stressful, and that, I know it's a very cliche thing to say, but for me, just try to always keep Him there by your side.
I would just like to add to that. I mean, when it comes to spending time with God, we forget too often. I mean, this is our the bottom line is it's not only our Heavenly Father, but someone who desires to have a relationship with us. And when I have a relationship with people or people that I care about, I make a point to make that time for them, right? If I'm going to hang out with Chandler, I'm going to guard that date that we're going to, go out to Taco Bell or whatever it is. And so I've noticed sometimes what I have to do is I just have to discipline myself and say, hey, this time on this day or these times on these days, that's my God time. Nothing, you would make time for work, right? You would make time for schoolwork, for all these other things, extracurricular activities you have. So guard that time for God too. Say, hey, you know what? Monday afternoons at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock to 3, that's my God time. It doesn't got to be an hour. Sometimes it's just as simple as, saying, hey, 5 minutes in the morning before I do anything, before I wake up and look at my phone, before I, go out, even before you brush your teeth or shower, whatever it is, God time, 5 minutes, whatever it is. The time is not as important as the intentionality behind it is my point to make with that.
Martin Luther had a really cool quote on this, and someone asked him, how do you spend your day? And he said, I am so busy today that I have to spend at least 3 hours in prayer before my day starts. So it was a different way of thinking about it. Instead of, I'm so busy, I don't have time for God, he said, I am so busy, I need God more. So, I really enjoy that quote whenever someone asks me, when to start with God, or how do you fit God into your busy schedule. It should be the first thing you do.
Yeah, and I would agree with that in the sense that spending time with God, I feel like everyone, I think John mentioned it, everyone loves to separate it. It's like the rest of your life is one category, and then spending time with God is another category. It's like, why are we always constantly trying to separate things? And honestly, if there are things in your life that you can't do, that you can't feel like you can pray about during it and do with God, then should we really be involving those things in our life? And for me, it's just like I was on a basketball team at my academy. When I was in academy, it's like I should be praying to God before and after games, making sure I have good sportsmanship during the games. And those are just practical things to honor God and worship God during your daily activities. And so instead of, yes, we should always find time at the beginning, end of our day, whenever, to spend time with God. At the same time, it's like, why aren't we specifically trying to involve God throughout our day and everything that we do? Because that's what it's all about. Everything we do in our lives, that's what our life is about when we're going out and doing things. And so if those things we aren't praying about, if God isn't in our heads, if God isn't in our thoughts during those things, then what's the point of spending time with God in the morning and in the evening if we're not going to involve God in all the activities, our work and school that we do usually? And so I feel like we overemphasize spending time with God just separately, which is great, and we should, but then we don't even think about we should be spending time with God through everything that we do and not just those specific instances. Anyone have any other offshoot questions off that? Yeah. Okay, so her question was, for those online, how can you continue to do your devotionals without it becoming a chore? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think mixing it up is really important. Listening to things, reading things that are engaging. If you're bored with something, it's not a bad idea to just try something else. If you're I'm reading a Bible in a year, and it is exhausting right now because I'm in Leviticus, I'm just okay. So, I have to take a little bit of time to find something else that's more engaging for me, and really just try different things out. A lot of things, if you're reading through a verse, you can pray it over you or over someone else that you know, and just make it more personal, if that makes sense.
I agree a lot with the trying different things. I think one thing for me that worked for me was switching up the setting. I would pray and do my Bible reading at my room most of the time, and like you said, at a certain point, it comes to be a chore. But for me, something as simple as switching up the setting, like going out to your nearest park or going out to a place with nice scenery would, I think for me, helped a lot.
And for me, it's, I think, kind of going off your guys' point, but in a different way. I feel like when we're going through our devotions, there might be times where it's feeling really good. We feel like we're getting a lot out of it. We feel really good with God. But then there's, all of us have experienced those valleys in our spiritual walks where it's I'm not doing anything different, but yet God feels distant. So why is this? And I feel like the dangerous thing with that is we all of a sudden we're God feels distant, so what do I have to change? And I feel like we always feel like we have to change something when we aren't feeling God. And I think that's a dangerous place to be, because just because you aren't feeling God in that specific instance or that specific time doesn't mean you have to change what you're doing, doesn't mean your devotional life is wrong. It's if God feels distant, I may be man, what am I doing wrong in my life? What sins am I dealing with? What busyness, how am I putting other things before God? It's all these thoughts are going before my head, it's like that shouldn't be what it is. It's like God, spending time with God, it's amazing in itself, and I don't have to be stressed about all these other things constantly going on. And so the beauty of it is I think we all, when God feels distant, we feel like we always have to change something. That's not necessarily how it is. We don't come to God. We shouldn't be coming to God just for a feeling, just to feel better. And I've heard from other people, it's the times where we stick with it, in those times where we feel distant. Even though we feel distant, we stick in our devotions, we stick in our time with God, because we're going to learn things in those times, even when God feels distant. We're going to learn things from the Bible that when we get into other situations in our life, we're going to be able to retain those Bible verses that we read when we are feeling distant, be able to retain those scriptures that we read, those devotionals that we read, those things that we heard, and be able to help people out. Even though in the moment we felt distant, we were still retaining that word of God. And so just a reminder, yes, find a different setting. Yes, find what works for you. But at the same time, just because God feels distant doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. God, we aren't coming to God just for a feeling. God isn't a pill that we're taking to feel better. It's like God, he's going to work in his timing, and his timing is perfect. His timing is a lot different than ours, rightfully so, because his timing is perfect. And our timing, I'm sure all of you guys can attest, we've all done some things too fast, maybe not really listened to God's voice sometimes. And our timing, that what we have for our hearts it's void. It's not really good at all. And so in those times of silence, it can honestly be the best times, because we know God is preparing something for us, and we can be excited about that in the future. So
Absolutely. That's awesome.
Any other kind of offshoot questions off that, or just another question that you guys have before we get to the questions that were scanned by the QR code? Those are some great questions also. Thank you, guys. All right, so I think we'll get going with the questions that we have here. And so the first one is kind of about, the first couple are about the podcast in general. And the first one is how to have a successful podcast and make money. And so, John, if you want to.
So we're currently not being monetized at all. So I feel like we're already unqualified to answer that question. But I feel like to start, I think we answered this a little bit about when she asked that question. But starting a podcast, or just like something of a ministry in itself, is just, taking that first step to actually doing it. For me, that first step was talking to Chandler. And I think just the biggest part of starting a podcast, or starting something that can be a movement, or something that can be big, is taking that first step. Because I feel like that's always the hardest part of doing something. Like, oh, I don't want to do this. It's just putting yourself in that situation to be able to take that first step. Pray with God and ask him, is this something that you want me to do? Is this a ministry that you want me to lead out in? And I feel like that's a good very first step to starting something.
And as far as the making money aspect goes, that I feel like everyone, like starting a podcast, starting YouTube channels, things like that, your honest goal is to honestly make some money for most people. But for us, I mean, I know before every guest we've had, before every episode we've ever recorded, we always pray before, and I always say, hey, God, I just hope this reaches whoever it needs to reach, whether that's a big audience or a small audience, whether that's a lot of people or not a lot of people. Just whoever needs to hear this podcast, help it to reach that. And so as far as money goes, we may not be the best people to ask, because if God ever in the future has this podcast make some money, that's great, but that's not what we're looking for. And for us, it's more of just whoever needs to hear it. And we know that, like we said up front, it's more of just having that voice in the actual, like, we're young, we've kind of just gone through the things you guys are going. So having that voice where you guys are at is more of the vision that we have and look for. So, and second question here, did anyone ever try to discourage you from your podcast?
I don't think it's anyone, moreover, like something. I would say the things that have discouraged me more than people have. I don't think anyone has tried to discourage us. But I think one thing that has discouraged me was all the setbacks that we've had, our scheduling, as I mentioned up there, and also like what setup would we have, like all of our equipment. And each time I've prayed to God about it. I've prayed to God about the mics, and I've prayed to God about where we're going to do this. And each time he's answered. Our pastor at our church had these mics for us, and that was an answered prayer. And just it's not necessarily a certain someone who has discouraged me, but those things that kind of set us back in the beginning.
And I would say, just like John said, it's less of the people and more of the situations that we're in. It's like even during the summer was a big thing. We started this podcast late March, and it went through April and May, and then it came to summer, and I was working at camp. I was going to be away the whole summer, and John was on this like huge vacation for a couple of months, and so it wasn't even possible to record. So to just start a podcast and then get into it, and for us to be away for each other for 2 months, we had to take a couple months away from the podcast. You know, that was pretty tough, and then in August to get it back going again. So it's less people discouraging it, and more of like situations that come that we have to deal with, I think, is the big thing. And for all of you who have worked in any sort of ministry or in any sort of workplace in general, like that can oftentimes be the thing. It's less, sometimes it can be more the people, but sometimes it's less the people and more the situations that you are in.
And so I want to ask to these two over here, kind of offshooting that same question, what has discouraged you in your place of ministry or in something that you tried to do for God?
What hasn't? I mean, like, when you sign up for ministry, I mean, you're putting a target on your back. Now, no matter how big or small you think it is, I mean, the devil's at work against you. As much as God is working, he's way more powerful than Satan will ever be. Satan, he has a very negative attitude towards any ministry you're going to do. And I feel like some of the biggest things I face are even just the internal struggles of the self-doubt, of the, thoughts at night that get to you, and you're like, what if this isn't going to work out? What if you're wasting your time? What if you're not in the right direction here? Just sometimes that's all it takes. And I feel like at the end of the day, what you have to remember is if God has called you somewhere and you're doing the work of the Lord, then what is going to stand in your way? Whom shall you fear? God tells us that he holds us with his righteous right hand, and the significance of that is it's a dominant hand. He's holding you, and he is your power. So I think the big thing to remember in any ministry, whether it's a podcast, whether it's starting something at your church, is this isn't about what you're doing. This isn't about what you're starting. It's about what God's going to do through you, and it's about his ministry. Because the moment you start to have those thoughts of, what if this happens, or I'm going to fail at this, you're making it about yourself. And it's not about you. It's about what the Lord's going to do through this ministry. So that's what I would just have to say about it.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Thomas was saying. Absolutely. For me, it's just been all about self-doubt and my own self-thoughts, just thinking about, this isn't going well, or there aren't enough people are showing up, or, and I just always think of Elijah, and he just, had this amazing, Mount Carmel experience, and then he fell into deep depression because Jezebel was chasing after him, trying to kill him. So, and God picked him up from that. And, so he can do anything if we just submit ourselves to him instead of get in this rut of focusing on ourselves, like you were saying, Thomas.
And so next question here, kind of completely changing gears, the next question that someone scanned a QR code and put here. And the question is it okay to go out to eat on the Sabbath? Question that someone put. So do any of you guys have any starting?
Well, where first? Then that's what I want to.
Where is okay. As long as it's a good place, then sure.
Chick-fil-A, there we go.
But I have kind of a story on that podcast. That question. Someone in my family has been very fascinating to me. It's actually in attendance. Isabella's uncle. I mean, my uncle actually mentioned this to me, and it was a very powerful story actually that really stuck with me. And so the story is, I'm sure Isabella's going to be correcting me in her mind that I'm getting this wrong, but the story is, it was very fascinating to me. So my uncle grew up, his father was either, I think it was a principal or a teacher, vice principal at a school. And so he was growing up at this boarding school. And so all week he had he was always with the faculty. He was always with the students. Every meal he would, be in the cafeteria, and he's always with the same people. And so on Sabbath, since it's a boarding school, the church, is in the exact same area. So when you go to church, Sabbath, the day of rest, you're still with all the same people. And him being a vice principal, him being like a teacher, it's like, his church experience, all it would be is people asking him questions about school and stuff. And he's like, I don't want this to be what my Sabbath is. 5-6 days a week of my week is focused on school. And so the seventh day, when it's supposed to be the time of rest, the time I'm with God, I'm having to deal with all these people's questions at my church. And so his point is their family would actually drive, because there wasn't really any place nearby to eat. And so, or even if they were at their house, they would still see all these people around, and they would be bombarding him questions about school. And he was done with it. And so they were like, okay, this Sabbath is supposed to be a time that we can rest for us. And so they would go out on their boat on Sabbath, listen to sermons, and they would also go out to eat, because that was the only place that made it different for them. Because if they ate at their school, I mean, they're with everyone. They're with everyone that would bombard them with questions. And so for someone like me, who grows up in the church, and all I've ever heard is don't go out to eat on the Sabbath, and that's the only mindset I've ever had, it was interesting to hear that story of my uncle being like, yeah, that was our mindset too, but eating at the church and doing what people normally do on the Sabbath was not good for us. It was not like a Sabbath day of rest for us. So they went out, not to just go out to eat for the heck of it, but genuinely because they were trying to get away and spend some family time by themselves, and going out to eat was that for them, so they could truly feel the Sabbath for them. And so again, I'm not saying this to like maybe change your perspective or anything, because there's also the variable of, when you're going out to eat or even getting gas on the Sabbath or buying things on the Sabbath, you're making other people work for you, and that's a real thing. But it was just a very interesting perspective that I'd never really thought of before, that, wow, maybe going out of the normal situation you're in, that's the Sabbath for you. That is what can truly get you out of what you're usually used to and the routine that you're usually in. So does anyone else have any thoughts on that question about the Sabbath?
I would just like to add to what you said. I mean, it's important to note that we make the Sabbath so often about the do's and don'ts. You can do this on the Sabbath, but you can't do that. When that in itself is losing the meaning of what the Sabbath was. The Sabbath was meant to be a day set apart from the 6 days of creation where God was working and creating the earth, to where he could rest. And he invites us in the commandment. I don't see the fourth commandment as a, hey, do this. It's I've given you this as a gift. The word it uses in Hebrew is shamar, which means to observe, to keep, to hold on to. And so we're holding on to this and observing this day where we can, it's supposed to be different. And so, like you said with your uncle, the Sabbath was supposed to be a day different from the rest of the week, where it can be a restful day, and it wasn't for him. So he had to do what he had to do to make sure that, hey, my Sabbath is the day God gave me, so I can rest, so I can enjoy the presence of my Savior, because the bottom line is that's what we're meant to do with the Sabbath. Take it as an opportunity to rest and set it apart from the other 6 days where we can do anything else.
And for me, I was just thinking today, actually, on the drive up here, I was like, is God happy when he sees everyone down here like, oh, the do's and the don'ts of the Sabbath, we should do this, and everyone's like arguing about it? Does that make him happy up in heaven, just smiling down on us because we're trying to figure out what exactly to do and the exact right recipe for the Sabbath? Like, I think kind of like everything else, we're overcomplicating it in a sense. It's like God's just like, be with me, take a break from your work, take a break from your usual life, and just be with me, rest in me. You don't have to try to create the perfect path to where you're going to be perfectly blessed if you take this path on the Sabbath, and the path that is perfectly right. It's like, just listen to your own heart, listen to your own convictions, obey those convictions, make sure you're obeying God, his word, make sure you're having rest, make sure your Sabbath is a different day, truly a different day of the week than the rest of the week. So anyone else have any thoughts on that question about the Sabbath?
I was raised fairly conservative, There were rules with the Sabbath that we didn't do certain things and we did do other things. And that made it sort of special, but yeah, like you guys were saying, it kind of almost made it, you didn't look forward to the day. It was just like, oh, we can't do these things. And so again, trying to shift that mindset, trying to change that thought process to where I really want to spend time with God, or I really want to be a blessing, or do something that uplifts him. And so whatever that is, there are many things you can do. And it's a great opportunity to be a servant to others and not just be focused on yourself and where we're going to eat or what we're going to do or who we're going to have fun with or what, just changing the focus of making me a servant and how I can be a blessing to others instead of how they can be a blessing to me. So,
because in a sense, if you're thinking of, that's a good point, if you're thinking of all these rules and what to do and what not to do constantly, you're really just thinking of yourself all of a sudden. The day is all about yourself. What can I do? What can I not do? When is the sun going down so I can do this? Even Friday night, when does the sun down so I can't do this? It's like it's truly all about what we can do in our priorities, and the day isn't even about God. And so, yes, it's good to think about these things, but stressing about all of it it all comes back to just focusing on ourselves, when truly the day is for us to rest, but it's truly all about worshiping God. And all those rules and everyone thinking about those rules and like walking on hot coals on those rules, it's like it takes away the purpose of the Sabbath.
Well, it's relational, it's relational. So what, like if you were to take a girlfriend out and you planned everything exactly right, and we have to leave now, we have to go, we're late, and well, you just want to go with it, make it natural, do something that's fun, but is also going to be a blessing that will enhance the relationship. So if you're going out to eat to enhance your relationship with God, if you can answer that question, go for it.
And just to wrap things up here, I don't mean to prolong this question, but it was brought up, we were asked a question, like, how can I fit God into my busy schedule and have that relationship with him? Because, I get it. Life is hard. High school, college, it's busy. Well, we forget too often God gave us a whole day that can be dedicated to that. So no matter how hectic or busy your week was, we really have no excuse to not spend time with him when we were given a whole Sabbath day of rest, that we can take that opportunity to spend time with him.
Yeah, and so kind of off that question, there was another question brought up amongst us kind of about the Sabbath in general. And is it okay to advertise? Is it okay to advertise on the Sabbath? Because we see a lot of these... Oh. So speaking of advertisement, we have an advertisement up, but this is also why we're posing this question. It's like all
You're
these summer camp things, even these mission trip things. It's like it's all great, but it seems like all the conference is doing is advertising like summer camps and stuff like that, not on the Sabbath. And then we get to the Sabbath, we're like here, and yet there's still some like advertising going on. Yes, it's for a good cause, but what are the intentions behind it? Is it money? And so we have to think about all these things. And so Nate, do you have any thoughts on that? Because you kind of brought it up beforehand. And what do you think about that? Like advertising, because it's not really for money, but is it?
Yeah, I don't know why when I see it bothers me, and it might be just because I'm old and I'm a curmudgeon, but I don't know. I know I can see both sides of the argument. It's definitely there. It's definitely a good cause. It's definitely a benefit. It definitely draws people to Christ. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just an old person. It rubs me the wrong way.
I would just kind of pose the question then, what do we define as advertising on the Sabbath? Because I could go up front on church Sabbath and say, hey guys, we're going to have this fundraiser here on Sunday. We're going to, come out, support, we're going to play some games. We're going to have fun. Like what are we really what is advertising on the Sabbath? What is the criteria we're talking about here?
It's a very, very interesting question. Look, I don't have the answers for. I feel like a lot of things, it goes with a lot of things on the Sabbath, is just where is your heart posture at? And the topic was brought up in class, is it okay for healthcare to work on the Sabbath? Because obviously in the Bible, there's Jesus, I think it's either 5, 6, or 7 times Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And so I respect the healthcare people that even are Adventists, but still decide to work on the Sabbath. But our professor in college did bring up, he's like, yes, working, like healing on the Sabbath and working at a hospital or something like that on the Sabbath is great, but truly it all comes back to where your heart posture is doing that. Because of course you can say, oh yeah, I'm working as a doctor today on the Sabbath to help people out. And you can say that, but is your heart posture really just to get that extra day of pay in, And it's like there's all these questions that you have to ask. And so with these types of questions, a lot of it is more of where is your heart posture at? Like no one can answer that for anyone else. So that's something personal you have to answer for yourself. It's like if you're truly working as a doctor on the Sabbath because you love to help people, that's great. But if you are saying that, but you're doing it for the money, then that's a different thing. And so it sucks to give ourselves an honest evaluation of things, of sins in our life, of convictions in our life. But sometimes on topics like that and things like that, it's necessary because it's like, what am I really doing this for? Because we love to justify things so much, and it kind of clouds our vision on some things like that. So any other questions I'm going to give this to the audience out here. Any questions? We're on the topic of the Sabbath. Do you guys have any questions you want to pose for us to discuss about kind of the Sabbath in general? Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the people listening online, the question was, is it okay to buy things on the Sabbath? And this is a very interesting one because that's how I grew up too. I grew up that you can't buy anything, and as I grow older, I can't necessarily pinpoint why, but I still feel guilty about it. Like sometimes I won't, because I always try to fill up my gas tank before Sabbath, and I usually try to do that. But there'll be sometimes I don't, and I'm not filling up my gas tank, and then I realize, I have like 5 miles left, and I can't get to church. God wants me at church, right? We got to fill up my gas tank. But I would do it, but I would still feel guilty about it, and I couldn't really pinpoint why. And so I think it's also just coming from the perspective of, does your guilt come from just because you grew up that way? Or does your guilt come from knowledge of the Bible, of knowing it's wrong? So for me, if I had to tell you, I would say I wouldn't go out and buy things on the Sabbath, because that's what I do throughout the rest of the week. And God says the Sabbath is a day set apart. I usually don't go out to eat because I usually buy food throughout the week. And so if going out to eat on the Sabbath for me, that would be kind of like the same as the week. And so even taking it a step deeper for me personally, there are some churches that have more kind of contemporary music than others. And for me, I listen to that contemporary Christian music throughout the week. And then going to a church like that, it would be like the same throughout the week. And so for me, the old time hymns that are sung at church, that actually is something different. That is it's all Christian, but for me, it's something different. And I think it's refreshing. I listen to that upbeat Christian music throughout, but listening to those hymns is something like different for me. And so I would way rather pick like an old-timey church rather than those contemporary churches, just because I do listen to that upbeat music throughout the week. I don't think it's wrong on the Sabbath, but for me, I just want something different. I don't listen to hymns. You can't really get like hymns throughout the week, or people don't really search for that. So to have those kind of that hymns, that old style is, for me, I really enjoy it, and I really like it. So I think it's just about the difference. God says it's a day set apart. And for me, I buy things on every other day. So I wouldn't buy things on the Sabbath. I would feel guilty about it just because I'm trying to make it a day set apart for God as much as possible. Anyone else have anything on this panel about that topic? Is it okay to buy on the Sabbath? Yes.
I think, again, where is it directing you to? Where are your thoughts going to go to? Where is your glory going to? If you're supporting that artist, what are they doing with their life? Are they being a blessing? Are they lifting up God in their music and in their life? So, you vote with your dollars, and when you're listening to them, whether you're buying it or whether you're listening to it on the radio, no one listens to the radio anymore, but anyway, you're listening to it, they're benefiting it in some way. So you're glorifying them by listening to their music. So for me, and I want to glorify God with my mind, with the words that come out of my mouth. So I think, what is it that what defiles a man in the Bible? Is it not what goes into a man, but what comes out of a man is what defiles a man. So, but the things that you put into yourself can defile you, because they're going to come out as well. So just be careful with what you put into your mind.
Yeah, and to add to that, I don't remember the parable exactly, but it's about like where you plant your seed, right? So, for example, if you plant your seed in a rocky place, will that seed grow up to be a prosperous, whatever it may be? Let's say a fig tree. Will it be a prosperous fig tree that grows figs? So I guess just saying, plant yourself in a place where you can grow positively. And I think worldly music sometimes kind of corrupts us from growing up to be a positive vessel for God and producing fruit for God.
I think earlier in the podcast, we mentioned just involving God throughout your day. Like, we often think of involving God as, I've got to have my devotion in the morning, have my prayer at night, and then it's like, we don't realize it, but the rest of the day, we really aren't involving God at all. We want to set those times, we want to check it off the box. But for me, I've been really trying to be more intentional about spending time with God all throughout my day. In school, in work, and every activity that I do, is God directly involved in every activity I do? And I feel like that's something I've been convicted at. So I think music could come under that category. Is involving God throughout your day, giving glory to God, is that through the music you're listening to, is that a part of that? Because I think that the more we pray to God, the more we get closer to God, the more he's going to reveal things to us that don't give glory to him and reveal things to us that aren't. So for me, if right now in your spiritual walk, if like this music isn't convicting you, like, don't do it just because other people are doing it. Like, it should be in your heart. And so if you ever feel convicted about it, and the thing is, there's a question that says usually when people ask a question, they already sometimes know the answer. Like for me, there's like sins and stuff that I would deal with in my life, and I would always ask the question, hoping that someone would have an answer to kind of justify it. And I had to look back and be like, what's the real reason I'm even asking this question in the first place? It's because I already feel just a little bit guilty about it. And so sometimes we have to go back to our hearts and be like, why am I asking this question? And so just going back to the main point of kind of secular music, like Nate said, is it pointing really just kind of cliche? Is it pointing us towards God, the path that God wants for us? Or is it not? And so for me, with secular music, I know that's something I've never really struggled with. I struggle with a lot of other things, but I know that's something that other people really struggle with. It's like this music, can it really help them like in times of need and stuff? But at the same time, it's like we've got to be able to slowly let go of those things.
I guess, again, I listened to a lot of loud music when I was in high school, like just crazy music, but I won't get into that. That was a while ago. But Philippians 4:8 kind of made me rethink, what I was putting into my body, and it is whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, if there are any virtue and if there's any praise, think about these things.
There was something I wanted to add to this. You mentioned music, but it honestly can be anything for any of us. Let me use an example here that I'm comfortable sharing. I like football a lot. I'm not just watching the game. Like I'm watching the games every Sunday. I'm also throughout the week. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm looking at the news. I got all the social media, and it takes up a large portion of my life, I realize. And I'd like to point out, I don't think there's any sinful nature to football itself. And I'm not saying if you watch football, listen to this music, you're a sinner, you're going down a path of destruction. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There are worldly activities that we can enjoy and still have a relationship with Christ. But the bottom line is, I think where it becomes the issue is the Bible tells us that no one can serve two masters, for he will learn to love one and despise the other. And there's a psychological study done where, and you can kind of know this from just living your lives, the more you hang around a person, you can notice you'll start to talk in their kind of like they use their phrases, speak in their vernacular. You'll start to act the way they do, and the same thing goes for the activities we spend our time in. And the more it takes up my life, I realize, sure, football's not evil, it's not a sinful thing created by the devil, but it can become my God. And we know from the first commandment, there's not meant to be any God but our God. And so whatever's taking up it's kind of just a personal conviction thing. So you're right, there is meant to be that conviction. I'm not saying you got to stop what you're doing immediately and throw it out of your life. It's evil. But I think there comes a point where I know I've had to with football realize, hey, I'm spending so much time listening to podcasts, watching the games. I mean, it's 3-hour games every Sunday. I'm like always waking up in the morning, ooh, what news is there? But when I realize that it's taking up so much, it's becoming my new master. What am I loving more than God? Because I think that's something we're not always willing to face, but it's just kind of being able to be self-aware of that and recognize, hey, this isn't a bad thing, but I need to recognize all this time I'm spending on this, I could be spending on God.
Yeah. And off your question, you said if you don't feel conviction, could you ask your question just one more time? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So his question was, do we wait for convictions for things that we know we may have a problem with? And I think how I would answer that question is when you get closer to God, I love to use the example of a team and a new teammate coming into the team. So for example, let's say you're a basketball player and I come in, I'm a new teammate, you're pretty good, I'm pretty good, but we get into practice and we aren't playing well together at all because we don't know how each other play. We're both good players, but we don't know how each other play. And so as the practices go on, as the games go on, I get to know you better, you get to know me better, to where we don't have to tell each other what to do. We don't have to tell each other how to play, but we just know. We know that I like to do this certain thing at this time. I know that you like to do this certain thing at that time. I can just give you eye contact, and I know when you're cutting to the basket, when you want to shoot the ball, I just know. And so I think it's the same thing with our relationship with God. The more we pray with God, the more we spend time with him, the more we spend time with him on things like this, at church and Sabbath school, listening to music, listening to people, spending time with God, the more we're going to understand his voice, so much so that in certain situations, we're not going to have to wait for conviction. We're not going to have to ask God what to do. We're just going to know. Because we spend so much time with God, because we're in his word, we don't have to be like, wait, is this wrong? We just know because we spent that time with God. And so I think how I would answer your question is when you were asking, should I wait on conviction? There are some things that you know you are doing wrong that you may not necessarily feel convicted about, but why do you need to? because God has already shed that light on you. You've grown up. You haven't wanted to give those things up, but you've grown up kind of knowing these things, and now it's time to take action. And so just the same thing with the team. The more you play with a player and a teammate, the more you get closer, and the more you understand them. You don't have to ask them. The same thing with God. The more you spend time in the church, the more you spend time in God, they're going to be with God. The more times you are not going to have to ask God. You're just going to know. And so when I would say wait on conviction, if there are things, I know there are things in my life that I don't even need conviction for. I just know I need to change them, but yet I in my sinful heart don't want to change them. And so just know that. There are some things in your life that you know are wrong, and the reason we're asking questions about them is because we're trying to justify it. So just know those things and know that because I've grown up in the church, because I've grown up with God, I know I need to change those things. But there are things, like in my example in my life, there are things that I've needed conviction for that I haven't really thought about. But then I've gotten closer to God, and he's convicted me of those things.
Sorry. Quick story. My wife's mother actually asked for conviction when she was a young mom. She was struggling with smoking, and she asked God time and time again, "Hey, please take this away from me. Take this away from me." So when you wait for conviction, you might be waiting for a painful lesson. So it might be best if you already know what the truth is, what the path is, to go ahead and make that choice before God helps you with that choice. Because she got in a car accident. And I'm not saying that was God, but she was in the hospital with face reconstructive surgery for weeks, and she did not smoke. And when she was out of the hospital, she lost her desire for cigarettes. So she attributes it that God helped her quit cigarettes. But why did you have to wait for that horrible experience to take place? So I understand lots of people say, I'm waiting for conviction, and sometimes it's a cop-out. To just be like, no, God hasn't convicted me of that yet, so I'm going to keep on this path. So my opinion, you might not want to wait for God to convict you of that. Yeah.
That's a really good perspective that I haven't thought of. But thank you guys for being here, and we're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon.
Yeah, we gotta let you guys go soon. But we want to thank you guys for listening to us and for asking us informative questions. Yeah. And for those of you guys watching, thank you guys for watching. We'll end it. But for you guys here, this is not the end. If you guys want to look up Young Adult Adventist on Instagram, we have a link tree where you can find us. We have our podcast on YouTube to watch. And then to listen, like there's
pretty much every podcast platform.
Yeah.
As long as you don't have a super obscure one, we think we cut them all. But yeah, let's go ahead and pray before we close out. Let's just pray really quick, and then we'll go ahead and end. Dear Lord, thank you for this great opportunity to be here at this amazing place, Regenerate, just with all of each other, not just our normal people that we hang out with, but a lot of different schools to just really mingle and get to know each other, and most importantly, get to know a lot about you, God. Thank you for everyone in this room. Please bless them and lead them, and just please help us to remember of all that we talked about today. Help us to retain it. I know this podcast has been a blessing for me. I hope it was a blessing for those in the audience as well. Lord, and just as always, just thank you for all that you do. Please lead and guide us, and help us to remember that today is your day of rest, and to remember you and worship you in this day, Lord. Thank you for all that you do, and please be with us and be with the rest of this program. In your name, amen.